There are times I honestly re-record these videos because I sit and listen to them and I think perhaps I'm being too hard. This is one of the times I felt I was actually pulled my punches too much. So what was supposed to go live at 6 o'clock this evening will now no longer go live at 6 o'clock. This will be going live later, which will probably be good because hopefully it means my little cousins won't watch it and they won't pick up a few new sarcastic phrases with which to torture their teachers. To quote one of my older cousins explaining why a child got into trouble at school last week. The sarcasm goes on. My grandfather would be proud. So, Operation Tan number 2. The most pointless waste of life that I have yet covered in this channel. And there is an argument that all war is a pointless waste of life, and you can see that, but sometimes you have no choice because someone else is willing to waste that life, and they're not a nice person, and they're willing to use that waste that life to dominate and control and obliterate the lives of others, so that they can claim glory and power. And then also, so it behoves the others to try and resist them. That's pretty much the tale of most wars. Well, Operation Tan number 2 is one of the most horrifically pointless wastes of lives I can think of. I want to give an example of an operation which not only shouldn't have happened, which was terrible at every single stage of planning, at every single stage of consideration, at every single stage of development. Everyone involved should have gone, there is no point in doing this. This cannot achieve any of its stated aims. It is not going to be big enough, not going to be numerical enough. We are not assigning enough forces. It's got no viability at all of actually succeeding. Every single stage, someone could have said that and could have stopped it. But they didn't. They went ahead and through it. And it's an absurd waste of life. I am someone who morally objects to the whole concept of kamikaze entirely. I will admit that. But I can understand why the Japanese went there. And the socio-cultural, economic, and historiographical scenarios which created a scenario where they actually thought it was a good idea and actually were following through it. But no, even amongst the plethora of kamikaze operations, of which there are many which are frankly bonkers, too insane, too pointless, this is the most obscenely pointless, obscenely wasteful. And I know I shouldn't possibly be using it to advertise this, but I'm going to point it out. Tighter trip. Thank you again, people. I've now raised £3,181.50 of the £3,600 I've been asking for, and that's going to make a lot of this possible. I'm not quite sure how inflation is going to affect things, but it's going to. Quite a lot of stuff is already booked in. Plane tickets already bought, are already paid for. Those things, so they're all sorted out. But thank you. It's £418.50 off the. What was the dream goal? My mum's still worried about how much I'm going to spend on books while I'm out there, and that worry wasn't improved when me and Drac were discussing and going, we can airmail the books back to us in the UK. We can, so we don't have to take them on the plane. Yes. All right. The definite hits will be Haida Sackville, Nova Scotia Archives, Maritime Museum, and Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. If I can swing it, though, I'm going to try and extend this by at least a day. So we would leave, instead of on the 12th, on the 13th, or maybe even the 14th. And so we get time to do the O class, the Little Rock, and Sullivans. And working it through and working out exactly how to do that and how feasible and affordable that is in terms of missing work. Because that will mean I'll be away from the 3rd to the 15th. It's quite a lot of work. But should be good. Anyway. Basically, I'm staying away from Ottawa because I feel like getting involved in politics. Anyway, the Pacific War in 1944. Operation U-Go. Now, this is the point at which there is a sort of semblance, conceptually, of a viable plan of attacking the American carriers. And basically, instead of being called U-Go, it should be called Operation Pearl Harbor 2.0. It's not U-Go, it's Pearl Harbor 2.0. This time they're planning on taking out the first mobile, using the first mobile force, i.e. the Kita Batai, to take out the United States carriers and vessels that will be based at Majuro, which was at this point the critical forward fleet base of the United States Navy. Now, I will say this. If the USN had been able to be caught napping by such a force in harbour, unsuspecting, the damage would well have been great. Pearl Harbor 2.0. Would it have delayed the war or stopped the Americans winning the war? No. If they had managed to sink a significant, and this is in 1944, amount of American carriers, maybe wipe out the majority of one of the task forces, what would that do to the USN? It would delay the war effort. It wouldn't stop it. I made the point in the live that the USN was still building a massive number of carriers, that they weren't the only ones building carriers. The Royal Navy was building carriers. Yes, if the war goes on longer, all that happens is, they go, oh, we'll have those carriers replaced in 6 months. And that's what they would do. They would have those carriers replaced within 6, maybe a bit longer, maybe 9 months. The point is, the carriers would be replaced. It's kind of like the Battle of Jutland, okay? Anything the Germans lose or really get damaged is just not coming back into service. Not in the same level it was before. They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the industry, they don't have anything going into the level they need to do that. It's and the British, whatever they lose, well, hello, have you met HMS Renown? Have you met HMS Repulse? Have you met all these R-class battleships coming into service? Oh, and by the way, we're also building the Hood and the other admirals, and then we'll be starting. There's all sorts of construction going on. Again, you can win, you can delay the war, but what does 6 months really buy Japan? I'd say they get 6 months. What does it buy them? It might buy them time to dig in further. It might buy them time to win more. But actually, what this plan seems to turn to is the plan which comes about at the Philippine Sea, which, as we know, does not go well for the Japanese. In fact, can argue that the Philippine Sea is the last chance to carry out the Kantai-Kessen, but it's absolutely terrible. And frankly, the whole point of the Kantai-Kessen was to rely on your opponents being an idiot and keep coming towards you, even though they're losing ships. Always be worried when your strategy seems to make your situation seem perfect. There is such a thing as designing your strategy to fit your situation, but you have to do it realistically. And first rule of strategy is always presume your opponent is as smart as you and as well equipped as you are. They might be equipped in different ways, but assume they're as smart and as well equipped as you are, and as loyal and as committed. Because the moment you make those assumptions that they're not, is the moment you don't prepare properly, and the moment you get into trouble. Which is basically the entire story of World War I, World War II, and pretty much every war known to mankind. It's someone making the assumptions that the other side was not as prepared to fight, not as willing to fight, as not as ready to fight, as not as capable of fighting as they were. Usually that person has a massive ego. Can't think where the coloration comes from. Anyway, you go languished because various people got killed. Then, first Air Fleet's commander, later Captain Fushida Mitsuo, who had, of course, led the attack on Pearl Harbor, developed a small-scale plan for attacking Majuro, and it was called Operation Tan. This would be a reconnaissance mission from Clarke, followed by an attack with 54 aircraft, 27 torpedo bomber planes, 27 dive bombers. That's pretty pathetic, let's be honest. 54 aircraft, but let's put it this way. If it was not a Gallipoli scenario, i.e. it was the first attack on Gallipoli scenario, the Americans believed they were completely safe, were lulled into a false sense of security. This is what I'm planning on. I'd like attacking on Sunday at Pearl Harbor, and then just attacking out of the blue with 54 aircraft. There is a chance. Not a great chance, but there is a chance. Not for inflicting massive losses. If you could double it, you possibly have a chance. The main trouble is these. Now, I know torpedoes were great at Taranto, but at Pearl Harbor, and pretty much every other time when someone other than Brits were doing it, on people in Harbor, there was a problem. The problem is very simple. Everyone looked at a torpedo and went, okay, we've got to make sure you don't dive as deep. Everyone concentrated on the torpedo. We'll put fins on it. That'll give it sort of slightly more streamlined, slightly more air movement. Okay, but it's still hitting the water and diving. We'll try and make this end lighter so it, bobs up. Okay, but it still does that. The British, you can say through luck, cussedness, or perhaps just thinking, well, the torpedo's a dumb weapon, which isn't very honourable. So is there something else we can do? Well, plane which is launching it has to fly straight and level. And as I explained in the 60-second video, what they did was they attached tension wire to this end of the torpedo, so it belly flopped. So between the fins at the stern, on the back, and the tension wire at the front, it would go and run. That was it. But of course, at Toronto, no one found any evidence of the tension wire. In any of these operations, no one found evidence of what the British had done. Because wires in the water, well, there's just been a massive air attack. Of course, there's wires in the water. There's all sorts of cables being snapped, aerials and this, that, and the other. And besides, some of them think. Oh, there's been explosions, all sorts of things. No one really noticed it. And it broke up on both ends, so it was just a cable in the water. So, honestly, torpedo bombers, not much point in that. Dive bombers, they needed a few of those. Now, it was all going to depend upon this aircraft, which is the C6N Station, or Painted Cloud, which is otherwise known as MERT. which is a pretty special little aircraft, and I do say it's a special aircraft. It's one of the first reconnaissance aircraft built for operating from the carriers because the Japanese had finally realized the big problem with conducting reconnaissance from cruisers, which are using seaplanes or float planes, depending on which one you're talking about. But the trouble is, they built an aircraft which is perfect. It has a beautifully powerful engine. It has all sorts of different things, but it needs to be fettled and cared for and loved. And, well, yeah, the operation scenario of this aircraft is basically, oh, we're going to send out 4. And, oh, they've stopped working. Oh, they've stopped working. Oh, they've stopped working. Oh, thank God a submarine's turned up with the supplies. Will they work again? Yay! It's just kind of it. In February 1945, before this operation, the 141st NAG, based at Kizura in Tokyo Bay, were ordered to dispatch 7 C-6N Scions to Clarke to cover the reconnaissance. On the 11th of February, the 7 took off. 2 returned to base with engine issues. 1 ditched en route. After an overnight stop at Chidori Airfield, Jima, 4 landed at Truk. 1 was wrecked on landing. This meant that, thanks to this, then combined with the fact that there wasn't the specialised servicing of fuel or really spare parts for the type available on Truk, by the next day, there was only 1 viable to take off. In fact, early 30th of February, this continues on, there is only ever 1 available. And it's mostly thanks to the delivery of I-36X, which we'll talk about in a second. Why had they changed from Majuro to Ilifi? Why had the Japanese target changed to Ilifi? I was still planning on launching reconnaissance from Truk as they had done. Were planning in Operation Tan. Well, they think it's closer. They think it's better. They think it's going to be less observed. And in 1944, October, Ilifi became the main anchorage for the US Pacific Fleet. It can hold 1,000 large ships. It has all sorts of facilities put up there. It will still be useful to this day, actually, frankly. You have floating dry docks. You have all sorts of things established. It's a massive base. And please note, when someone says the words, oh, there are 15 carriers there, wonderful. But there aren't just 15 aircraft carriers there. Please look at the lower picture on the left of your screen. Look at that picture. So you're going to attack 15 carriers in that. There are ships as far as the eye can see. Supply ships, warships, tugs, escorts, cruisers, destroyers, battleships, carriers, escort carriers, fleet carriers, light fleet carriers, the lot. Everything is there. They're planning on sending 54 aircraft against us. First, they're sending 54 aircraft against Majuro when that had this there. And now they started considering it for a Luffy. There is a waste of life going on here. There is no point attacking sometimes when you only have penny packet forces which will never do enough damage. You are just sending people to be wiped out. It is better to save up your penny packet and until you've got a proper strike force. I always use the example of I had a friend. We used to play Red Alert, an old computer game together. And especially Red Alert 2, when that came out, he would build the war factory and be manufacturing tanks, the basic tanks, the Grizzly tank, as quickly as he could, and would send them charging out to attack the other players. He does the same thing in Supreme Commander to this day. He gets a medium level unit and he just spams you and just keeps sending them out. As soon as they're built, they're sent. And it works against some people. But once as the game goes on, if there's anyone who hasn't attacked already and they've had time to build up their forces, when those penny packets arrive, they just get wiped out. All he's doing is giving me veterancy. Because usually I'm the other end of the map from him for some reason. I don't know why the game system always seems to set me up the other end of the map from him. And by the time he gets to me, I've got defences and I've got everything lined up, and I'm just building stuff up into large formations. And when I send them back, he's got nothing there to stop me. They eat up the penny packets as they go. This is the point. Tan 2 is worked up by Commander Nomura Ryosuke, who had previously led fighters on the Soryu. And their primary targets are, of course, the American carriers. And so he's thinking like an officer who's had to defend carriers. And that's a good thing. But there is the only way I can explain this as happening on any kind of honourable way, not just we're doing something for the sake of doing something's sake, is that everyone in the Japanese High Command who touches Tan number 2 becomes infected with a positivity bias, a success bias, a victory supremacy bias, where everything has to work, and not only has to work 100% to succeed, but everything will work 100% to succeed. Excuse me, brand new reconnaissance aircraft, you sent out 7. 3 never made it to the halfway point. 4 got to the final destination. 1 crashed on landing. 2 was rendered unoperable by the sheer lack of supplies and logistics support, and only 1 is flying. And by the way, that only flies after the 13th because you send a submarine to turn up with supplies and logistics. And it brings enough parts, etc., to maintain 1. Despite, theoretically, it's supposed to be loaded enough to maintain 7. One out of 7, that's, I suppose, less than 15% success rate. Serviceability, 15%. Let's, perhaps that's what you should be planning for. Okay, how many aircraft do I need to get there to attack? I'll plan that only, I'll work that out. That's going to be 15% of the force. Okay, scale up. How many aircraft do I need to send? These are all viable ideas to maintain. It's not what's done with Tan 2. They are planning to go and attack the most important ships in the US Navy at that point, because those are the key enabling warships that allow them to do the amphibious warfare, allow them to do all the operations they want to do, are dependent upon those ships. And the Japanese do not allow for their opponent to get anything right or actually be in any way awake. Turns out they're not awake, so that will be fine. But the trouble is they also require that the Japanese, in turn, will get everything correct and everything will work perfectly. So here's the plan. Let's call it what it is. This is the plan. 24 Yokosuka P1Y Gigas, that's Milky Way, Francis twin-engine bombers, formerly of the 762nd Naval Air Group, but by the 7th of March, they were the Azusa Tubitsu Butai. Azusa Togubutsu Tokubetsu Butai, and they each had a crew of 3. That would be the strike plan. 24 aircraft. There'd also be 5 4-engine Type 2 Quasi H-8K Emily flying boat Pathfinders of the 801st Naval Air Group, provide weather and reconnaissance, advanced patrols, and these are special attack units, Ginga bombs to Liffey. They do this. There's obviously 4 large land-based bombers, but honestly, I don't find them turning up at all. There are accounts of them taking off. There are no accounts of them meeting tasks at the air group. So maybe they do, maybe they don't. From the accounts I've read, I don't think they do. 3 rescue submarines will be used in roles from logistics to rescue. You've already heard about one. And the C6Ns were responsible for the reconnaissance. Well, they'd sent 7. One of them was responsible for reconnaissance. That was launching from Truk. Okay. So, this is the plan. This is the plan. Fly from Kenyoa, hit a Liffey. Avoid the electrical and storms and other storms, which, of course, is going to, if you're avoiding them, going to add on to your fuel consumption and reduce the amount of fuel you have available for the operation. And remember, a not uncritical part of a kamikaze's impact is the fuel it carries. Yes, they're carrying bombs, which is advantageous because they're going to need them. But, and I say this with love in my heart for everyone involved, a kamikaze is pretty much a flying bomb. That is its purpose. It is, well, to be honest, it's the World War II equivalent of a tactical land attack missile. I know some people like to point out to the V1 and the V2, but the guidance systems for those were primitive compared to modern guidance systems. And the guidance system for this was the most advanced guidance system we could actually factor into a system, which is a human. But 24. And they were predicting somewhere in the region of 19 carriers. They actually turned out to be 15 when they got there, but let's be honest, there is a lot more than 15 aircraft carriers there. There are a lot more than 15 aircraft carriers. There are all the other ships there. There is that. And yes, there are people who come back and go, well, is that all they had available? No, they had more on they had more stored on the home islands for the defense of home islands when the attack came. And I suppose the question you have to think is, would it be better to use up aircraft to buy yourself enough aircraft to seriously damage the American fleet to buy yourself 6 months where you could produce more new aircraft? Or is it better to I don't know, more closely manage your numbers? Frankly, myself, I think if you're saying you shouldn't be wasting aircraft on this, you shouldn't be wasting any aircraft on this. If you're not prepared to do this in full force, and if the nicest way, I would be saying saying at least 240 aircraft would be what I would be thinking. Maybe more than that. You know, there are. It's a viability requirement. How much firepower are you willing to put in to knock out a significant portion of the American fleet? If you're relying on them and it turns out they don't really spot them coming, could have made Pearl Harbor 2.0 possible. Then what's the point in sending just 24? If you're relying on them being asleep to get in, then they're going to be asleep whether they're facing 24 or 480. This was the critical aircraft from the reconnaissance perspective once you get to actually deployment. They are being used to weather prediction. They're also being used to guide the Gingers. Konishi H-8Ks are some of the most important aircraft from the Japanese perspective in World War II. They are basically the Japanese equivalent of the Flying Porcupine, aka the Sunderland. And I do realise that name is more likely attributed to British propaganda efforts than the Germans, but you know, look. I-58 Type Type B3 submarine. Well, we'll get into the submarine involvement in this operation. It's one of those things which just makes life so much better. So, the plan was quite simple from a submarine perspective. The 3 submarines that would support the strike would be the 2,607 ton B3, I-58, a small 370 ton cargo submarine, HA-106, which was skippered by Lieutenant Okatita Akimisa, was to cruise off Minami Diatojima to pick up the unditched air crews. And I-366, a 1,779 ton Type D1 transport submarine, was to make a supply run to Truk to make things viable. In fact, I-366 was, prior to departure, had a Type 13 air search radar installed, in addition to a Type 22 surface search radar, and dispatched on the 29th of January. The problem for her, for their submarines again, is they have a similar issues as the aircraft. In fact, I-366 ends up coming back to get fixed, because despite being seen off by Rear Admiral Nomura and his staff, and you know, basically getting a very formal departure, things broke down and she had to come home. With the attack being delayed due to it turning out that the Americans were actually in Ilipi in February, B3 is sent on her way to do other things, and in fact is in the process of taking some Kaiten suicide submarines en route to Iajima. Now, the I-58 Type B3 is called back. There have been several points put forward to me because I made a fuss about her being called back. She was 90 minutes away from the drop-off point for the Kaiten when she's called back. There are some people who've gone, well, it could have been anti-submarine warfare. They were worried about that. Yeah, but honestly, it's at the extent of the Kaiten range into Iajima, you might as well launch them. The need for her to get back in time. She got back in plenty of time, would have got back in plenty of time, even with 3 hours added on the journey. Honestly, the only reason for recalling this submarine from that operation and making her sacrifice 2 Kaiten suicide submarines without any chance of them actually getting anywhere near an opponent and only bringing 2 back. It's because this is the plan in the book and we have to follow the plan. And that is the submarine we have to send. That is the plan. We've got to do the plan. It's... We can all imagine the personality of the people who said that. But this is the plan. It says to use this sub. Is there another sub available? No. Okay. Well, how many hours do we have till we need that submarine on station? Yes. How many hours till this complete this task? Okay. Let it finish its task, then tell it then that's the next assignment. You're not going to gain anything by moving it up there for 3 hours earlier. And here is, of course, the Yokosuka P1Y Ginga. Now, if I'm going to talk about this one, I have to talk about its survivability. So, after the C6N managed to photograph the Liffey anchorage on the 5th of March 1945, they decided there were 16 carriers in the anchorage. When this was confirmed, and after almost getting shot down by 3 P-38 Lightnings, they worked out that the strike was going to be against 1 Saratoga type, 4 Essex types, 3 Independence types, 7 escort carriers, and 4 identified ships. That's presumably the larger vessels. I'm presuming they're just not counting the destroyers, because the nicest way, the carriers won't be sitting in there without the destroyers nearby, and their escorts, and their protection. Because they don't go to different places. (11th of March was designated as D-Day by Admiral Toyoda. Wonderful luminary of the Japanese Navy. I think I've already done a video about. Anyway. So, they call it up. First of all, the H-8K Emlys are delayed flying off because of bad weather over them. Then when they get taken off, the Emlys are sort of divided into 2 units. 3 flying boats, including weather readiness boat, charge off, and the 2nd unit go and escort the P1Y's Gingas. Now, the Gingas start takeoff at 0900 hours for their Toko suicide mission. They don't get really going, therefore, till about 0920, which is 20 minutes later than scheduled. 4 hours into the mission, they passed HA-106, that submarine doing the duty of, "Hello, where are you? We're here to help." Five of the Gingas, at that point, turn back because of engine troubles, and they land on Minami Datojima. 3 Gingas crash. We don't know if any of their pilots were recovered, any of their aircrew were recovered. We do know the HA-106 came back to Kanoyo the same day and then returned to a station for 2 more days. So we're down from 24 to 16 already. Okay, we started with 24 Gingas. 5 have turned back and 3 have crashed. And this is by 13:20 hours. I-58 is in position, and Hashimoto's Type 13 radar picked up the approaching planes, and submarine therefore sent out a continuous long-wave radio signal. To give them directions. Now, one of the H-8K Emily Pathfinders disappeared, and 6 more P-1Y Ginga bombers had to turn back to Kenya. So you're now down to 10. due to engine issues. And it keeps getting worse. More Gingers start to develop engine troubles along the way. 2 of them pitched in the sea, down to now 8 out of 24. 8 hours after takeoff, they descended through the overcast, rainy sky, basically, at this point. And this is, of course, they took off at 0900 hours, between 0900 hours and 0920 hours. And 8 hours later, that is, of course, 520 hours. 1720. As a result of a navigational error, they found themselves near Yap Island, 120 miles west of Ilifi. They made a sort of mistake. At this point, the H8Ks, the last remaining one, went to Melon. And 4 of the P1Ys crash landed on Yap. Now, by my counting, I have been able to account for roughly 20 of the 24 so far. However, what we do know is only 2 of the P1Ys actually reach Ilifi. Finally, they reach Ilifi. 2 aircraft reach Ilifi. Sun sets at 6:52. They reach Ilifi at 20:07 hours. They reach it at 20:07 hours. By my count, I could be wrong. I will accept if my maths is incorrect. But let's say they all took off at 9:20. Let's do that rather than the 900 hours, because that makes... We'll be generous. They've been flying for 10 hours and 47 minutes. That's a long time to be flying. And the reason we know they reached their target at roughly 8:07 is because one of them crashes into the USS Randolph. That's the damage it causes. A 27,100-ton Essex-class carrier. By the way, she's back in service for Okinawa. She is back in service for Okinawa. The aircraft had so little fuel left in its tanks that it didn't actually even burst into flames. It didn't burst into flames. It had so little fuel. It wasn't even fumes. Fumes in a tank can be far more flammable and dangerous than actual fuel in the tank, but there is so little there isn't even fumes in the tank. Mostly on Randolph, there'll be 26 killed and 105 wounded of the Americans. The Japanese lose between 60 and 70. Between 60 and 70. They definitely lose at least 13 aircraft. It's just... there's them. The other aircraft, by the way, that reaches there, well, there are disputes over what it gets confused by, but what we do know is this happens. It ends up crashing into a baseball diamond. So maybe it's confused by a road on one of the islands and thinks that's a carrier. That could be the truth. Or it could just be confused completely. Or it could actually think a baseball diamond is a carrier. It doesn't matter. It crashes into a baseball diamond. It does no damage at all. Perhaps it ran out of fuel while it was looking for a target. I honestly cannot tell you. All I can tell you is that the Japanese launched 24 aircraft plus 5 support aircraft on a strike mission, of which only 5 were supposed to return, and in the end, only one actually hit a target it was supposed to. And it did so little damage, the carrier was back into service within days, weeks, if not days. And do you know what's worse? The Japanese have been right. The Americans had been caught napping. The Americans had gone overconfident. They did manage to sneak them in. Americans didn't see them coming. And this is all they achieved. Next question that comes up is, well, could they have achieved more if they'd sent more aircraft? Well, considering how little fuel they had left in the aircraft they'd sent, probably not with those aircraft. What would happen if they converted some, I don't know, medium bombers? Another twin-engine aircraft, but something bigger than a Ginga, that can carry a bigger load. Maybe done something similar to what the Americans did for the Doolittle raid. Now that could have been scary. And that could have wiped out a large number of American carriers. Carrying enough explosives, fuel, plunging into the decks. Yeah. They don't do that. These are some of the pictures from the Battle of Okinawa. The big blue blanket. Facts, development of an air defense doctrine that would provide security for the carriers and the ships of the task group to operate with not impunity, but relative safety. The Bunker Hill, which of course was devastated by kamikaze attacks. But notice the fuel. Notice the multiple hits. And honestly, for the Japanese, there's a British carrier being hit. If one of those or a Midway had been the carrier hit instead of Randolph, the odds are there wouldn't have been that many people hurt. Which is not jingoistic on my part to say that. It's just a fact. The designs. The Essex is a good design of a carrier, but it's not as strong as a Midway or armored hangar carrier. And honestly, it shows you how lucky and unlucky the Japanese were. And that, of course, is Yamato. Going sky high. Submarine survived. Despite only receiving reports of voice communication of one aircraft transmitting that it was attacking a target, and picking up several plain language radio messages about an air raid on Italy, the Japanese all convinced themselves it was going to be amazing results. They'd sent in 24 aircraft. They were expecting amazing results. They were expecting war-changing results. They were expecting this was going to be the second Pearl Harbor. Next day, that C-6N flies over Truk, and I'm wondering if it flies from Truk, and I'm wondering if the Americans let it in just to show the Japanese exactly what had happened. And discovers that all the carriers were still there. No fuel was visible in the water. Nothing looked out of place. There is an old tradition in the British Army, and to this extent in the Royal Navy as well, of something called the Forlorn Hope. And their purpose was to be the first group of people up onto walls in sieges. Seizing all better people to carry the scaling ladders and go straight up. Seize the walls. It's basically considered suicide to join them. It's considered such a bad likelihood of your actual surviving. Everyone gets promotions. NCOs to officers. Officers getting promoted up ranks. All the troops get promoted up ranks. Everyone gets a promotion. That's how bad how bad your chances of survival are. Everyone gets promotion. That's how often they actually have to follow it through. Hence, it's called the Forlorn Hope. Bernard Cornwall, which makes a big thing of them, but they're real. And the whole point of that is it's supposed to be such a high-risk operation, but it's got a guaranteed reward. Not just for you, but if you succeed and get control of that wall, your army, the rest of the army can follow and can take a city. There is a concrete reason for doing that operation. There is a concrete reason for making those risks. And the thing is, Forlorn Hopes often got some of the best troops and were often not as small as we might think they would be. They could be a very small band of 12 to 24. They could also be 100 or so. It depends how many they thought they could get close. And they would sometimes be divided up into multiple parties, attacking multiple parts of the wall. A Forlorn Hope has a point. It's called a Forlorn Hope, but it has a point. It has a justification. This didn't have a justification. Operation Tantu is a needless waste of life. And yes, that is me being nice. I have not sworn, and I have not even said the words frigate, fudgesicle, or Footenanny. I haven't even said my giddy aunt. But for all the forlorn nature of Japan at this point, for all the fact that they're losing, that they're having these glorious victories ever closer and closer to Japan as the war goes on. This is possibly the most horrendous example of the Japanese conceiving an operation which might just work and then not supplying it with the resources even they have them available. Because again, think about it. Do this operation properly. If you're going to waste people's lives, do it properly and actually make it worth something. You send some of those bombers. Perhaps you send some big bombers in with bomb loads, as well as the kamikaze aircraft. Mixture of the two. I don't care. But surely someone could look to go, hang on, this is never going to be enough for that many ships. No, we're going to need more. And, oh, by the way, we're going to be out of fuel by the time we get there. Especially once you're diverting around weather. You're going to be out of fuel. It's just possible. And what have we got coming up? So, we have Glorious Heritage class cruisers coming tomorrow. Then it's the Pathfinder class, which are coming next Tuesday. And then the Tuesday after that is going to be La Argentina. Pretty fun. And I haven't yet updated this one all entirely, including the fact that we now got up to Patron 50, and that's 48, 49, 50. But Brew Ships on the 20th of March is not going to be Brew Ships 75. Brew Ships is going to be live with the Glorious Heritage class, I think. Depending on how you all react to the Long Patrol, which actually comes out tomorrow, and this time because this is being recorded on the 14th March, and it comes out on the 15th. That is what the live will be about, because I've had a few good points back from people saying they'd like to see that, so that's what I'll do. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and if no one learns anything else from this channel, and I do realise the old saying that historians are the only people who are doomed to watch other people repeating history, but can we please not repeat Operation Town 2? There are so many better things of history which if you're going to repeat, you might as well repeat. This one is not one. Please don't. Take care. Have fun and